So I uploaded the notes. I will go over part of the notes in the assignment with you. So far we talk about evidence, and evidence is a way that we can determine specific things about our facts, whether the individual is guilty or not. So you want to gather as many of the, well, you want to use your evidence and prove that your evidence is going to be proven that the individual is not guilty to start. And that's more of an ethical approach, is to go into it with neutral and to show that, you know, the individual is not guilty. But then in some cases that will be incriminating the suspect, so we would provide the evidence in court. So some of the things when you're looking through evidence and when you were doing lab 2, you see that the process in using the software tool and getting the image, that's really a way for us to acquire the data for as evidence. So in this, you need to really understand that, especially when it comes down to the physical acquisition, you have to make sure that there's chain of custody. We have to fill out appropriate form. There's template of forms that's available through SANS and NIST, so you can use their template, or if your company provides you with the form. So you can work in the security division and you have to investigate, for example, fraud cases, you know, some kind of behavioral cases. So you have to really gather the forensic evidence for those specific cases. So it's important to really handle your evidence, especially with physical property like smartphones, USB drives, computer, hard drive. And when you do this, make sure we fill out the form and make sure we secure it. So it needs to be in the container that's not going to be contaminated. Most of the time our electronic devices needs to go into anti-static bags and container and such, right? We touched on that previously in the other weeks. I did purchase some anti-static bags for your project, and then I will put things on your USB and that will be mailed out to you, or you can pick it up if you can't receive mail. So I will provide you with the location down the line for your project. So it tells you that you cannot take shortcuts, because shortcuts becomes an issue. It's going to become questionable, or, you know, we can't prove specific area if we're taking shortcuts. So even with the procedure step by step on how we're looking at the evidence is very essential. So the first thing that you need to understand is that we need to validate the procedure and the method that we're using, or the process that we're using. Meaning that we need to test it and we need to go over it multiple times to make sure that we're getting the same result. If we're getting different result, we have to explain why we're getting different results. So you have to approach it from a very scientific perspective, where you have to reproduce the same result by repeating the process multiple times, right? It could be 50 times, 100 times sometimes, but we have to make sure that the result that we're getting is consistent and accurate. So it's important that we do so. And as we go through the process, sometimes we would use hardware tools and sometimes we would use software tools. So the environment that we're examining the evidence is essential, right? And so what we want is we want to make sure that we have a certain expectation and a mindset for digital forensic. So the mindset is that we want to make sure that we are conducting our investigation with minimal mistake as possible. And when you have multiple examiner or investigators that's involved, sometimes that can create issues because one person might overlook something else. So your process has to be very clear, and I would recommend using a checklist. Now, we always want to have multiple copies of the system image, and we only evaluate or examining the copy of the image. not the source system. So in the case if they're confiscating, if we're confiscating computers or laptop, and we are creating the image files from those laptops or systems, we are only allowed to examine the copy. You don't want to examine the laptop itself because that can change things inside that laptop, especially files that could be used as evidence. So we want to make sure that we have the forensically sound examination environment, meaning that we would want to control it where we would make the least mistake. And that's essential. So when you go through industry certification for this area, they're going to question you on that, right? The questions are going to pertain to what is the intention and the action and how that's going to minimize the mistake that you're going to conduct, or that can occur in the investigation that you're conducting. Okay, so it talks about that. So in our first question, it goes over how you should handle your evidence, and we previously touched on this and we repeat it again, that you need to ensure that there is a chain of custody. So we have to keep track, and that's what the form is for, of what we're using or what we're looking at as evidence, who is accessing that evidence, what time, right, and what type of evidence. And we also need to make sure that we properly secure it in a manner where it's not going to be contaminated or damaged. So in the case where it's damaged, we no longer have the evidence that we can use. So you go back to square one, then you have to go and gather additional evidence. So to answer question one, we want to make sure that there's chain of custody and there's proper security and handling when we're working with evidence. So that could be physical or logical or both. Keep in mind that a lot of the times when we deal with forensic, we have to work with the logical side as well, right? Things that could be like virtual systems or, you know, files and things like that. Or sometimes that would be like a mobile device, laptop, etc. Now, you need to validate the procedures and the processes as you go through evidence acquisition. So the way that we would do this is we would repeat the processes of the procedure step by step to produce the same result. And we want to keep track of this. So we want to document it, right? The first time it produced this type of result. Second time it produced this type of result. Third time it produced this type of result. So that way we can show there's consistency in the result and consistency in the processes throughout multiple trials of examination. So to answer question two, we want to repeat step-by-step procedure to produce the same result. Now, some resources like NIST already provided some of your forefront, right? Some result for specific testing area. So you can use that to be able to establish an expectation on what your result should be. And it's different case to case, I know, but on standard type of cases, they have concluded some of the validation for you, so you can actually use that and then be able to see where your case would be. And then in the third question, we touch on this. It asks, describe the forensically sound examination environment. Why is it important in investigation? So as we mentioned, we need to perform methodical and thorough digital forensic examination of evidence. So we need to look at things very, very closely, every file, right, in that image. We need to perform it in a manner where it would be consistent and it could be validated. So that way we can eliminate mistakes in the investigation. And the industry provide a lot of the tools. So for example, if you're using Paladin or if you're using X-Ways, it comes with multiple areas where you can go through the process in one tool. But we don't always use one tool for everything. So in most cases, those tools will be useful, but not in every case. So keep in mind. Okay, any question relating to forensic sound examination? This is a harder area of cybersecurity, so this is why you don't have as many people going into this area, because it takes, you know, patience, effort, knowledge, and then detail-oriented mind. So, and you can expand your skill as you have additional investigation and training. So having training coming into this is essential. Okay. So speaking of that, going into number 4, it asks you, why should digital forensic examiner pursue continuing education? It's because our industry in security in general, it changes all the time. And there are different tools, different techniques, right? So for somebody that's been in the industry for quite a while, what they have to do is they have to keep on learning different tools, different changes, right? Because attacks, if you're looking at hacks, it's different from years ago and now, right? Because of the tools availability, different approaches, different technology that's used. So the training will give us more awareness of what has been changed, the type of tools that we can be using, and the type of practices, right, that would work with specific investigation. So I just put down to be aware of the changes in tools and practices in the field. So even after you get certification, and if you work in the field, you would always want to have professional development year to year, at least once a year, so that way you can be aware of new tools, new practices, right? Different types of cases that you might come across, so you will be prepared. Any question on number 4? Okay, and you can find all of this information in our Unit 3 notes. So now, as the role of the examiner or the main investigator, you will have control over a lot of different areas. For example, to be able to initiate the next set of action in your investigation. Because the technician, they will just hand you over what they initially find, and then you will have to make a call on what to go from there. So you should have some kind of expectation as far as the outcome on where your case evidence should be, what it should consist of, and what you need to find. So in the case where if we're looking at child pornography, right, we have to really narrow down the scope on, let's say that it's coming from a server, right? We need to take a look at that traffic that's serving from that system, right? The host and also the content inside that server, okay, as in specific files. Then we're also looking at the target on where is that traffic going to. So your scope can change case to case. So if you have an expectation on what you need to find, it's a lot easier than just looking for everything, right? With comb to. So it's really difficult to really look at everything with the amount of time that we have, because sometimes that you are given hours or even months or years, even in some cases, but we want to make sure we have the expectation. So now let's go in depth into some of the tool validation. Even though some of the tools are commercialized, it doesn't mean that it's validated. In general, most of the common tools NIST have put up a list of validation of those tools and for specific cases as well. Okay, so having the technical training and the investigation training that will help you to really validate the tool, because even if you use a validated tool and if you don't have the credibility, that could be difficult to justify in court. So you need to know the artifacts that can be found by specific tool within a system, and you know that there are different operating systems for Mac OS, Linux, right, iOS, Android, and then Windows. So what you should have is a checklist to identify the areas that you need to validate. Some things that the book mentioned is that looking at the file that was created or deleted, right? And it could be different from one OS to the other. Most of the time it will put it in the trash bin, but is it permanently deleted? How can you find that file? Because a lot of time people will try to delete evidence, right? If they commit something that could incriminate them. So what we want is we want to be able to see and find the evidence in different type of systems. So having a checklist. And it says that if you cannot explain the basic, all your findings will be called into question. So, you know, if we have to drill it down to the very basic level, so that way it's very clear and thorough. So with the tool, we have to understand tool functionality. So using and practicing on these tools are essential. So we chose to use Practice Lab because it creates a safe environment for you to really use some of these tools. But as you go through it, if you have a dedicated virtual machine or a system that you want to do this, that will be best. So you would have a test system to really practice and explore and be able to get better. You need to also document your training. Some of these certifications, industry certification, it requires that you have educational credits over the 3-year span that they give you certification for, even if you're a member, right? So if you go through like SANS training, if you go through NIST training, if you go through InfoSec training, some of the main industry training entity, they have, you know, certificates and also training courses for you. And even at some conferences like Black Hat and DEF CON, they actually do some forensic training there as well. So you want to make sure that you document your training, and then you can also look into specific areas of training that you want. So for example, if you want to only investigate mobile devices, right, that will be some area that you can expand on. That will be a plus. Then you have to be able to validate your tools. So these are some of the areas that would show that we are competent in forensic. And then some of the things that we need to look at, right? Some tools are good for data, looking at data sets, and then some tools are for overall, and then some tools are only looking at drives and imaging and so forth. So there are specific tools for specific areas like we mentioned. Now, as we go through the validation of your tool, you need to really ask some of the questions that's mentioned here. Number one, if you're getting different result in the same method, what happened? Okay, so as we go through step by step and we're thorough, we should be able to see what we did differently or what occurs in the second time or the third time when we go through the same step. Okay. What happens if you get different result in the same process? And if you do get different result, you have to explain, right? Especially when it becomes legal, like more of a legal case, you have to explain why is it different, what makes it different, okay? Because if you cannot explain and your tool is not validated because it provides inconsistency in the result, then that will be questionable in court, okay? The majority of the time, this becomes a legal matter. And so even in the corporate cases, right? Okay, so for the next question, question 5, it says, how can a forensic examiner show the integrity and validity of tools? Number 1, you just have to know your tool, understand the functionality of it. So the more exposed you are to the tools, the more comfortable you are with that tool and knowledgeable you are with that tool. You need to document your training. So if you don't know the tool, then you have to make sure that you sign up for the training so that way you can get exposure and practice on the tool. You need to take notes during examination. And then you need to reproduce the same result so you can validate your tool by repeating the steps. So it's never the case where we do it once and be done, right? Like in our lab exercise, it shows that you did it once and you're done, but you have to repeat all those steps all over again using those tools, DD, Pro Discover, all of that, and see if you're getting the same output. So ideally in the lab environment, a lot of the times when they train you, they would put up the lab environment with specific files. It would be close to perfect, right? But in real world cases, you might have other factors that will impact the validation. So that would take resources, time, effort. Sorry about my dog. It's close to the evening. Sometimes they find someone at the door and they start barking. Okay. All right. Anything with 5? So before we get into 6, I want to talk a little bit more about how we would be able to use your RDS. Last week, we touched a little bit on this. Okay. So NIST, they created a knowledge base that's very useful in the industry where we can use the information for the validation process. Okay. So simply what this is just data sets that was provided by investigator, right? And as you go through, you can also submit your data sets. And it's been validated because it's been tested and getting the same results over time. Okay. So we can test the data in several ways. We can just repeat the process until we get the same result. We can do proficiency in testing, training, and then now if you're using a third party, you have to make sure that there's documentation and they also test and validate. It's difficult to prove third-party data sets in court because it's questionable. Now it becomes, another examination that's outside of yours. So how to, we have to validate that as well. So in your textbook, there's some provided example on page 32 and 33. And it's fairly a short chapter. If you go through it, there's a lot of screenshots. It gives you, you know, decent screenshots on some of the tools that's recommended. Okay. All right. So for number 6, we simply visit this link. And here it talks about the CFRED project and different type of tool testing technique, how the equipment is checked out. So in proficiency of testing and skill testing, all that is based on knowledge and how well the individual is able to utilize, the examiner is able to utilize the tool. Okay, so here it explains the specific data set documentation, set distribution, current set. And as you move down to the bottom, they have some of the older, right, historical data sets, some dated years back and some was a little bit more current. So here it tells you the type of data set and the description for it. There are different cases. Okay. So here is the hacking case. I have you click on that. So like most cases, we have to start with the scenario. So when you review the cases that's given to you, or let's say you take over a case, you would look at the documentation for the scenario. As you know, when you see this, the date is 2004, so that was years back. And also technology has changed since then, right? With our notebook or our laptop computer. So here it tells you that on September 20th of 2004, a notebook computer, the brand, you notice they put the brand and the model and the serial number. So when you write up your case, you have to do something similar, right? You have to note all of that. And it was abandoned. What they did was they used the PCMCI card, which is how they would connect to the Wi-Fi, right? Here it tells you how what is used and what it connects to. But in this case, because this computer was found, it says that it's suspected that it was used for the hacking purposes. And there is a hacking suspect, Greg Shard, right? But they have to be able to build the evidence with it. Okay, so his nickname online is Mr. Evil. So this person would be in his car and then he would try to intercept traffic. So doing man in the middle, meaning intercepting traffic and trying to analyze the traffic. And then to be able to get credit card username and password. And this is a common thing now, right? That gets sold for identity theft. So public Wi-Fi, he scans the public Wi-Fi and then he's trying to intercept the traffic, analyze the traffic and get the details that he needs. So the DD image, and as you read through the chapter, you would see that, you know, usually they're only specific type of software that we would use to create image. And in your lab 2, you've been exposed to DD, right? You would take that section of the drive and you would create the image, which is you capture everything in that section of the drive onto another file and then use that file to evaluate. So the DD image contains different parts. And then another type of tool that can be used is the EnCase. And every tool produces different file formats. So if you're using DD, you're gonna get DD file or DD image. If you're using EnCase, which is a commercialized tool, it would produce its own image file. So what they did with this was they used multiple tools to get the image, okay? And then from the image, the investigator has to evaluate and answer these questions, okay? So first we want to look at the hash, and in lab 2 you saw a little bit of that, how we can look at the image hash and verify that it's matching. So that way, if it matches, that means it's not different, right? If it doesn't match, that means it's different. And we want it to make sure that it matches so that way we know that it's the exact image of that source system. From the image, we'll be able to look at what type of operating system that laptop has, or that user was using on that laptop, okay? So if you want to practice, you can download the image and then you can use, right, a tool to be able to examine that image, and you should see. So you should get, and they include the answers in here because this is a test case. So we should check out the date, the time zone setting, the registered owner, computer name information, the domain, similarly to what we did the first week when we're looking at traffic, but this time we're looking at the system. And then what was the last recorded shutdown, because it would tell us the last time that this person used the computer. And then the accounts are involved. And so in some cases, you will have multiple accounts, and we'll talk about the legal aspect with that, right? And then you have to evaluate individual account. What account name that was mostly used on that computer. And so as you go through, so this list of questions kind of allow us to really look at specific area as we examine that image, okay? Then we get into the specific like IP addresses in the MAC, looking at the domain, what kind of email address is this person using, because he's acquiring Social Security number, credit card information. That means that he is going to transmit that or send that somewhere, possibly, or he could put it into a file and send it as a file. So we need to take a look at email addresses and the type of servers. Okay. Then you also need to look at communication channel. And back then, IRC is like how you would do instant messaging today on a lot of the apps. It's a way that they communicate, and people still use this. Now we come across a lot of the communication channel that's also encrypted, right? I know Snapchat uses encryption. In the past, they were talking about how some of this encrypted channel is how ISIS was able to communicate back and forth. Now that also becomes an online area and the channel, and then you also have to get permissions and access to resources from the service provider. So we have to really identify that first and then be able to branch off and look into additional, evidence from that area. Okay, then we look at the sniffing program because he's scanning traffic. So likely, so whether it's passive or active, okay. And then what type of websites they're accessing and so forth. Okay, and then files, was there any files that were deleted? Where are they? Are they permanently removed from the system? Where is it on the file system? And then you should always check with anti-malware to see if there's anti-malware on that system. I mean, malware on that system. Okay. So all I need is just a few questions answered. When does the incident occur? We already saw the date. Who is the suspect? How many images are needed in this investigation? So they had 2 image file, and within the DD, they have they broke it up into 8 sections or 7 sections. So the type of tool that you would use to examine this image is we can use DD, but we got to make sure that we validate this. And then the commercial tool, right? Because we have the 2 images, the other commercial tool is, or the commercial tool is the EnCase. So I put down this link. I think I put it in your notes. I'll open it so you can see. So look through the hacking case and answer some of the general questions to have an idea of what that case is about. So NIST has a whole section on disk imaging. Okay. So here's some of the software testing support tool for Linux. So you can use these links to find additional information about your tools. And then they have test plan that's included. So it shows how these tools are being tested. And then ultimately we have the report. Now we have to go through and we can take a look at the specific on who tested this, what kind of tools they have, you know, the information with the logs and the details for the files. So that was their test result. So to answer E, you can say that you can use, right, the testing program from NIST to be able to determine if your tool has been validated or not. And then you can, you know, redo the steps as mentioned in the test plan and see if you get the same outcome. Any question on 6? And you're welcome to look at the other cases as they're interesting, right? But the hacking one is, a lot of the time when I teach forensic is when I revert back to that, because it's easy to kind of look through and it gives you a good example. Now we do also have a website that tracks all the attacks that have been reported, right? So in the case that it impacts assets in the company pursue, you know, they need to report it. They have to report it to law enforcement, and law enforcement had to report it to the national database. So that would track. And then of course the media gets a hold of it and then it's all over the internet. But in some cases would be smaller. And so it's a way that we can look at, you know, and people research this, right? They would go and they would look at the trend of attacks, how we can eliminate some of, you know, the issues that we have and so forth. Okay. All right, let's get into Sterile Media. So just like, think of it like if you looking at, you know, shows or an actual investigation for the crime scene, right? People put gloves on because they don't want to contaminate things that they touch. That could be blood, that could be other fluids, that could be hair, nails, etc. Well, when we deal with digital forensic, we deal with storage devices, okay? A lot of times our evidence come from storage devices, drives, SD cards, RAM. So sterile media needs to be used before the start of forensic and at the end. So you need to sterilize your media before you start your investigation. And then after, when you're done at the end, right, you need to clean that out, okay? So what do they mean by sterilizing the media? So we know that we have to take copies of the image and put it into a storage so that way we can evaluate it, whether it's, you know, a hard drive, a computer, an external hard drive, etc. We got to make sure that that drive doesn't contain anything that can contaminate the evidence, things that would impact the evidence. So what you would, and they talk about co-mingling of data, right? It changes the state of your data. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that you sterilize the media by zeroing out the drive before you use it for image evaluation or copy. Okay. And the cool thing is that some tool came with this. So it has from step 1 until the end, right? It has the functionality where you would start cleaning up your drive. It has the tool for that, the feature for that. So you would initialize that. Once it cleans the drive, then it would have the additional feature for you to go and, let's say, get a copy of the image, add the documentation in the form so it saves it with that image. And then it also have the reporting feature. So as you go through and you evaluate that image, and you would find more information and you can add more onto the documentation or on the reporting form. And then when you're done, right, you save that information. It also have a backup feature. And then lastly, it has, again, the sterilized portion where we would clean out that case because we already have what we need, and we would present that in court or, you know, to the executives. Then you want to clear out that case because when you move on to the next case, you don't want the previous case to impact the next case. Okay. Now we know that data can be in unallocated space or the slack space and allocated space. So you gotta take a look at the U space, could be for the OS if it's an active partition, and also the space that's not being used by the OS, the unallocated space. Okay. Because if they delete that already, it just make it available in the unallocated. So let's say I deleted a partition. You saw that when you did last week lab, it puts it back into the unallocated. But technically, it's not fully deleted until, right, it gets zeroed out. Okay. And the book, it talks about, you know, we say 0, but you can use other character to really write through all the sectors on the drive. However, right, the common tools is that they use the 0 as the character that would clear out or sterilize the media. Now, it says that, you know, we still have to wipe the drive and sterilize of all the pre-existing data, even if we bought it brand new in the box. So new drives doesn't always mean that it doesn't have anything. So we want to make sure that it's clear. So to answer the next question, it says, why should you use sterile media before the start and at the end of the forensic process? We don't have the capability to create forensic image then we are forced to copy and perform our examination on. That's one. The second thing is, let me see if I added that. Let me move that over. Okay, sorry. It's getting cut off. So if we're copying the image, because we don't really create that image, we copy that image so that way we can see what's inside it. So we want to make sure that our drive is clear and it's not going to impact that image. Then at the end, we want to remove the previous case information so it doesn't impact the next case. Okay. Now, the way that we can verify if the media is sterilized is to use Checksum. And they said not to use the other hash algorithm because, you know, in the encrypted case, it would generate differently. So you want to use 64-bit checksum to see if your drive is sterilized. I know that Paladin, it does have this in place. So it actually sterilized, and then you can click a button and it tells you that there's this is the checksum. Any question with 8 or 7? You can find the details on page 3 and 4 as well. So let's say that you hand over your case to the next investigator, right? We have chain of custody in place. Before it leaves your control, right? If you know, if the investigator needs to have the image and evaluate it, then chain of custody. But if you hand your drive over to the next person for the next case, you've got to make sure that you wipe it clean. So no confidential information or anything that would get released to that next person. Okay. So to sterilize, we would use hexadecimal 00. And you would get the 0 that will be generated when you run the checksum. If it generates other values, then you know that it's not zeroed out or sterilized. We don't use MD5 or SHA to verify sterilization. Okay. So with Paladin, you can have it installed on a USB. Back in the day, they would use DVD or CD. And then you would use that to boot to the OS that contain on the USB. Now, what Paladin is that it allows you to also look at the computer without modifying any evidence in it, but they don't recommend looking through right off the bat. So we usually we copy the image from that source system to our drive and then use Paladin to examine that. But you can. Okay. It also let you create forensic image and convert forensic images and also sterilize your media. So it's more of like a all-in-one tool. And some are better than others, of course. Okay. Any questions regarding sterilized media? So after we sterilize, we should get all 0. Okay. So for 9, it says what tool is used to sterilize media. So you can use Paladin Toolbox, which has a set of tools, and within it you can sterilize your media. You can also use X-Ways to validate that the media is sterilized. Paladin has its own too. So in the book, the author actually took a lot of the screenshot for different tools, and he shows you the step on how to do that. So if you purchase the textbook, you can take a look at those. And many of these have trial versions or the open source one you can download. Many of the open sources are cross-platform now, so Mac OS and Windows, right? But, you know, you have to, you know, identify the system that you want to create image. So if you have like an old computer that's still working, what you can do is you can use one of these tools to make an image of it, and then you can evaluate that image and see what you can find on it without looking into that computer, of course. Okay, so we can look at the image of that computer, which has OS, application, files, everything. That's a good way to practice. For our project, we're going to do something similar on a smaller scale. I'll talk a little bit more about the project down the line. So as we get closer to like week 8, 9, right? Any questions regarding 9? Okay, so write blocking. And you saw that there's software tool in the last lecture where I had a list of all different tools, and you can find some of the software tool. There's software for write blocking. But in this week, we're going to get a little bit more into it. So write blocking is a way that we can prevent the changes, right, to a source storage, drives, SDs, etc. So you have two options, hardware and software. So the hardware, what it does is it intercepts and prevent modification to that device. It could be a mobile system, it could be, you know, storage, depending on the hardware. So I want to show you one. So here is one. This is the CRU forensic combo doc. And on average, you might find them about $200, $300, $500 for one that has a lot of different features. There are some that are less, like, you know, $30, $50, but it doesn't have the capability to connect to interface many devices. So on this one, what you have is, you know, most of our devices are connected through USB now. So you know that when you connect your laptop with your mobile devices like your smartphone, automatically the firmware is going to want to talk to your OS, and it's going to try to see if you want to transfer data. Yeah, that changes your device as a whole. Okay, so with this type of device, when you plug things in, it doesn't launch all of that right away. It's preventing the device from trying to connect and transfer data. It's looking at it as a storage statically from an outside perspective. So in this one, you're able to connect to different storage. So if we look, right, we have different interface or different port here. And of course, you got to give it power. Okay. And with the hard drive, like SATA, you got to give it power, the drive itself. So it has the capability to distribute power to that drive along with connecting the data connection, so that way we can evaluate the files within without changing it. Okay, so this one is about 300. You might find some for 500 or more. right? It also depends. Sometimes you can get a toolkit that would have this along with other tools that would come with it for thousands. So, okay. And then on the software level, we can simply control it from the OS by changing the registry to make sure that it prevents the right to change or attach USB devices. Because as soon as you attach the USB, right, the firmware wants to launch, and then you're able to see the content of the USB. So we can control that through Windows registry. And then if you're using a software tool, it would also allow you to control the permissions and the privileges on storage components and then also file access. So when we evaluate the file, it doesn't change the timestamp on that file, because most of the time it would say this was last accessed or modified. Okay. So here is an article from Windows Central, and it actually shows you how you can, you know, change the registry settings. So I added that there for you. If you're interested, you can check that out. And then, but remember, when you modify registry, be careful, right? Because if you modify the wrong thing, you can also crash your OS. So WinFE was a legacy tool that would use for Windows, and then now you would see Paladin being used, and that would be used also to prevent writing, or we would have write blocking. Any question? Okay, so as we touch on the write blocking tool, I want you to use the internet, and you can locate 2 hardware write blocker devices. There's no budget for us, so you can buy something nice and pricey, or you can buy something that's affordable. But remember that some of the affordable ones might not have all the interface that you need for all the storage. Okay, and simply you can just search write blocker hardware, and you would be able to come up with many different results. Okay, so we saw Combo Doc, right? And then there are other brands to that. So there's UltraDoc with Forensic. That's going to run about close to $300. So that's the normal price range that you would see. And we want to have, you know, many different type of connection or ports. Okay, so just locate 2 of your choice. Now, if you want to go with something more portable, like the USB one, make sure you check out its feature, right? And again, even if we're using something commercial like this, we still have to validate that and make sure that it is a good tool, adequate tool to use for our examination. So I just need you to find 2. Provide just a general description. You can include price if you want, and then the URL for number 11. For the next question, it asks you to look at the Windows system and how you can enable the settings for write blocking. And on page 4 of our notes, and also you can revert back to the textbook if you like. It notes that you can change the registry to prevent writes for USB attachment. Now on the network level, they can also control this too, right? for your system to not be connected to USB, so they can disable that as part of the privilege in the policies. But in the registry, because registry, it actually tracks software and hardware level on what is changed. So when you install software, that also gets tracked in the Windows registry. So here's the article, and it shows you the step-by-step on how to do this. So we need to change the registry in current control set under control. And that's part of the storage devices policy. So that way, when you plug in USB, it doesn't automatically launch the firmware for the USB. Okay, so you can get the steps to the link there. Any question? So I simply put change registry to disable rights for attached storage or USB storage. And then there's more to it. We have to change the policy for the storage, so that way that system doesn't have the privilege to, even if you plug it in, it won't be able to see it as it won't launch the firmware and try to open that USB, because those are plug and play devices, and plug and play devices will do that. Okay, so this is number 12. Any question? Okay, so we're gonna move to imaging. So we mentioned a lot about copies of image. You did with ProDiscover and DD. You saw how you can, evaluate the image that was copied. Let's talk about this specific type. So there's forensic copy, which is bit-to-bit copy, and this is a legacy way of getting the copy for forensic investigation. Okay. Now, we don't want cross-contamination. So this way we would have bit-to-bit copy from the source computer to the storage device where you would have it. And they don't do this as much anymore. What we normally see is we would see a forensic image where we would do a bit-to-bit copy still, right? But it is in an image format. So you can use something like DD, EnCase, and then we'll talk about AFF down the line. Okay. So when you pull the data, what will happen is that it actually has the protection to that data, so it doesn't write when it doesn't change the data date or access or timestamp information or the state of the data when you use that. So as part of the image using those software tools, you can also recover deleted files from the unallocated space, and put that onto the image. So forensic image is basically, it's still a bit-to-bit copy, but it's used as an image format. And when we say image, it would include like, OS or application information along with the data. Sometimes that could just be essentially only data, but the forensic image should include the actual system as a whole. Then the logical forensic image, that would be only for data sets. So when we're looking at specific files, folder directories, that could be coming from a server, right, for contraband or whatever, then you would get a logical forensic image. And you often see this too with mobile devices, right, like iPhones, Android, tablets. Any question? Okay, so let's go through the next question. It says describe the differences between, or the difference between forensic image and logical forensic image. As we mentioned, that forensic image would contain data file of bit-to-bit copy of the source drive, whereas logical forensic image, it contains data sets of the source drive. So in the forensic image, you might have application file, right? Where logical forensic image, you're only dealing with data sets. And the two formats for the forensic image, we saw already. The industry, commonly we would see DD being used, so the DD format. And sometime you saw in the hacking case, they broke it up into 7 pieces. So you don't necessarily have to have one file for everything. That could be very large. So in the last chapter, the author talks about how he would break it into smaller pieces using the software tool, right? And then you can focus on each of the file as a group to evaluate or examine for your evidence. And then we would have EnCase, which uses E01. And EnCase they have their own certification. So as you go through and use EnCase more and be more comfortable with it, you can also pursue their certification. Along with Ftk is another one that does vendor certification. Kind of like Red Hat Linux or Windows certification or Microsoft certification, very much like that for that specific software. And government, many agency uses EnCase and Ftk. Okay. So what they were saying here is that for commercial and open source backup software, we don't use those for digital forensic examination, like, you know, your common data recovery software, stuff like that. There are specific tools for the data forensic. So when you use those, number one, it changes the data state. Number two, even if you're able to capture the image, it's not appropriate to use it when you go through the documentation and the reporting process for legal matters. So we would use the proper forensic tool. So it highlights some of the features for some of the tools. And then there's DC3DD, which is because DD command in the Linux or on the software, the utility itself has some issue. So what you can do is you can also use concurrent version or a newer version of DD where you would use DC3DD in order to have additional information about your data sets. Because it says that DD command is updated and it automatically updated to DCDD. So they had created the new version for this. Okay. So it would be able to write errors to the file, create error log, and it would have a verification mode. So it's enhanced compared to just the DD. And then a little bit more information about NCase. It should be capital C. I'm sorry, that's a proper name. So when you use NCase, of course, you have E01 format. And also it would use expert witness format or image file format. So in the NCase, you're able to create multiple formats. And what it does is it prevent changes to the actual image format and also changes to your raw data. Okay. There's additional security features. So this is why this software is pricey. And they do have ongoing training for this, right? They add new features, they add new things to the tool, or the toolbox, I should say. Okay, so we talk about the image type and the tools that we use to capture that image for evidence. Then we talked about sterilizing our drive, but now let's get into the type of drives that we should or should not use. SSD is great for the fact that we're going to get a lot of the performance, like it's fast, right? And you're able to copy the image quickly. However, there's some areas that's questionable with solid state drive. Number one, right? It says that it can, because it's flash device, what will happen is that you do have firmware that's associated with the solid state drive. And then in some cases, you would have premature failure in storage block. Similarly, in the case where you see that with USB drives, flash drive. Now, when you plug in solid state, just like the plug and play devices, it would cause the firmware to move the data around, so it changes your data. So make sure that we have right block in place when we do that. And with solid state, it has this trim feature. I just went over this with my computer repair class. So as you delete files on solid state drive, what happens is it's a way that it would clean out the garbage, right? Like this cleanup. It's very much like that on the HDD. It would clean it up so that way it can reallocate that space for new files. Okay, which then take the deleted file space and dump it over to the unallocated space, mix it in, and then with trim, it makes the deleted files unavailable. So if you accidentally delete a file on an SSD, it's a little bit more difficult to retrieve after trim command is already been applied. Okay, so just keep that in mind. It's efficient for regular usage, but then on the forensic side, it can cause problems. So if you're aware of it, you just have to take precaution coming into it, and then you'll be good. Okay. And then there's additional things about about image hash values where it doesn't match. And so what we need to do is we need to be careful when we're using solid state, even though it gives us the best performance. Okay, so I copy some of that piece over. I talk about overuse of blocks. Firmware could move data around. When you plug it in, firmware could launch. Trim can move deleted partition into unallocated space, so it becomes no longer accessible to us. And so with the larger capacity, what you see is that your image hash might not match. depending on how long that's idling. So there's inconsistency in the hash, and that would create problem for us because we want the hash to match to make sure that it's the same. When it's not matching, it's not the same, then it becomes the issue. Okay? Any question with SSDs? So there's no perfect technology, really. There's no perfect tool, right? We have to optimize and use the features accordingly, and we have to keep in mind the deficiency of that tool so that way we don't make mistakes. Or if we do make mistakes, it will be very minimal and we can explain it. So that's the important part in forensic investigation. So you can find all this detail on page 6. All right, lastly, we want to talk about imaging tools. So another option we would have is your Ftk Imager. And as I mentioned to you, that Ftk is commonly used as well. They have the commercial version, and then they have the free tool version. I previously used this. So I would try to draft up something maybe for next week where we can use. I just gotta make sure, you know, that we can install it and use it on all different systems. So because I don't know, everybody can have different computers. So there are different versions in release. I think the one that the book gives you is the 4.2. Okay. And as you can see, when you visit that, that's from their website. Access Data is the company. And then you can have it downloaded. Okay. And then if you're interested in other products for their forensic tools, you can find that there. So I simply just click other products. They are connected with eDiscovery. So there's the Tool Complete Toolkit. There's the international one. There's lab. There's a lot of different utilities. So they have additional tools that you can look at. Okay. And this is one of the ones that also certify. Any question? So with this, it also create the hash value, help us create, get the image, copy the image. Okay. Now there are 4 types of images depending on the software, right? In general, this is the common one. There are others, but you would have the DD. You would also see Smart. Okay. And Smart is the forensic tool that's commercialized in Linux, because many security professionals, when they do investigation, they use Linux platform, whether it's virtual machine or on their laptop or it's a computer. And you do have Windows tool as well, but you know, you often see Linux as well. So Smart's for Linux. The link is there if you wanted to find it. We talk about EnCase. And then AFF is an open source format. And if you research basis technology by Simpson Garfinkel, you will find AFF. Okay, so that's another format. So to document in the tools, you would have some kind of form, but this is the basis. We need to have a case number. We need to have evidence number. We need to have unique description, meaning make, model, capacity, serial number. And we need to have notes on details of that device. Okay. So usually the tools would give you, it generates the case number automatically, like, 001, okay, and so forth. And then you can give it the evidence number. You can come up with the schematic ways. I think when you use ProDiscover and DD last week, you also saw that right near the end for lab 2 when you fill out that form. This helps us put together the documentation and our reporting, which is the last part of our case, like case findings, etc. So, and then if we need to go back and track our evidence, that also helps too, because you have evidence number, and you might have many different many different devices for that case, right? So you can have laptop, desktop, tablets, etc. So we want to make sure that we track it. Okay. So just a few questions left. Only one left. You don't have to write everything there by verbatim, but we want to have case number, evidence number, unique description pertain to make, model, capacity. So if you're looking at the drive, right, we can say Western Digital, right, and then the model number, the capacity 500 gigs, serial number, and then any additional description about that drive we want to be able to note. Okay, any question? Okay, so I have some time, so I just want to share with you additional details about mobile, and the links are available on your note page of this module, this week module. So for number 16, just to repeat, you can find this on page 7 of our notes, okay? Okay, so real quick. So I added some of the links for you. And as you go through, some toolkit would have the capability to examine mobile devices evidence, but some are not, okay? Then you have to find the specific. So here is one, it's called MEET, or Mobile Evidence Acquisition Toolkit. And it shows that it's been tested on different releases of iOS, so 13.3 and 12.4. Okay. So in this, what you can do is you can examine the device by going into different areas of that device. And a lot of times we can look at like file content, like photos, photo data, sometimes even email that's connected on that. Okay. Now on the file system, it talks about that here. So what this will do is it will copy files into a folder location. And then you would use that to look at the data. Okay. So that's one, and it would look something like this. Okay, so that's MEET. And then on one of the links provides evidence acquisition for mobile forensic. Now it talks about some of the stuff we touched on already, right? Like manual acquisition, but it also gives you additional details on, right, like visual display, data content. if you're having a screen, right, like LCD screen, like a television, how do you deal with that? Where there's no keyboard, there's, or if it's touchscreen. So some of the newer details can be found on these type of website, and InfoSec Institute, they do training for forensic as well. So they provide a lot of the resources so you can find some information on, specific areas if you look at, okay? Like breach, what did they, based on their research and investigation, what did they find? So it goes into the two areas of the physical acquisition is dumping and decoding. So when you're dealing with physical memory like RAM, right, you want to dump the raw in hex file format, then we need to interpret so that way we can see what it is because it's hex file, right? So we have to go through a decoding process, okay? And if you look at mobile devices like an iPad or a tablet or even smartphone, internal memory is essential. That's where we're going to be able to see a lot of stuff, right? Like especially with the iPhone, there's no SD. So we have to look at the raw data in physical memory of that device. And then specific to the OS, that will be your file system. And we touch on allocated space and unallocated space for the computer. But for images for the mobile devices, right, the allocated space, we can look at things like password, encryption, database, logs, videos, images, and then the unallocated space would be hidden or deleted data. And people would try to delete, like what we said before, so we would search in an unallocated or what we call slack space, very similar to the computer. That's what we touched on. Okay. And then with the logical acquisition, we would get into Wi-Fi connection, Bluetooth, right? Additional connectivity for the mobile systems, data that's communicated back and forth. Then we have to also pull traffic, network traffic. Interesting area is the brute force acquisition. This is, brute force is it's just try and true, right? Try until it gets something. So it says that we can see that it would identify for passwords, numbers, okay? So the tools for the brute force, like, to be able to get passcode, because that people can lock the system using passcode, swipe, facial recognition, fingerprint, etc. Okay, so here it tells you on iOS, you can use sustain, an IP box. For my Python students, Python scripts. And there are some resources related to Python scripts here. So when I teach Python scripts for cybersecurity, we'll get more into this. That's CIS30B, I believe, or C. Okay. And then the challenging area, it talks about that here, especially with encryption. That would be very important. Custom apps, hidden data, forgery. There's so many different areas. So mobile device is highly demanded as far as forensic investigation. If you have the knowledge in this, you're hot cake. But at the same time, we know that it could be challenging because there's many different devices and tools that we use and some of the difficult area that we're going to get into. But it makes your job fun and interesting. Okay, so This is a good link to look at. It gives you some decent resources. It came from, InfoSec, and they do a lot of research, training, and investigation for a government entity and big corporations. So you can look at that. They used to have a magazine. I think a lot of the stuff is published online now. Let me see what else I want to touch on before you go. I also include the National Institute of Justice. They have some details also on mobile investigation for data acquisition. Okay. With the disk region on how to look at and getting into some of the files format for the image limitation using SIFT. Okay. So take a look at those and try to read through those and see if you can learn, and you should be able to learn additional details and more technique, approach, tools. Then we also get into cloud, right? So some of these articles tells you more of the modern technology and what they would use. Because, in the discussion case, we talk about Cloudflare, they're hosting, right? It's on their server, but when you're dealing with web services, cloud servers, what would be the process and how would we be able to do forensic with that? Okay. So DForce 2. And then it talks about different things there, but this is a good article to look at as well. Okay. Let's see. I show you the FTK, I show you NIST. Oh, this is for this cloning with DD if you're interested, but you can find this online. Okay. Make sure that when you look at open source tool, make sure that it comes from legitimate sources, because there's a lot of advertisement in, when you just Google search it, sometimes it's coming from, some website that's strange. So make sure that you check the website, make sure that it's coming from a valid source. A lot of the times, if it's from the company, they would put it on their page, or if it's from the developer, they will put it on their place. Yeah, I was looking at this DD for Mac OS. They have it for Linux and Windows, but, and then how to use it on Mac OS. I'm more interested in learning a little bit differently from the Mac OS because I know how to use it on Windows or Linux already. But for the Windows one is here, and then you can also find instructions for DD there. Okay, so pbxbook.com. And then there's a project for Windows here. So you can download it. Okay. Question? Okay, we finished about 17 minutes early. No question? Okay, so if you missed earlier, I put in the Google form for apprenticeship interest. Fill that out. We plan for the spring to launch apprenticeship where you can sign up for the course and then be able to work and get paid while you're doing that. You can do it over multiple semesters. So hopefully you'll be able to get your